Send Round the Hat by Henry Lawson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Son of the Exiles. Send Round the Hat. Now this is the creed from the Book of the Bush. Should be simple and plain to a dunce. If a man's in a hole, you must pass round the hat, were he jailbird or gentleman once.
Is it any harm to wake you?
It was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and though it was Sunday morning, it was no harm to wake me, but the shearer had mistaken me for a deaf jackaroo, who was staying at the shanty, and was something like me, and had good-naturedly shouted almost at the top of his voice, and he woke the whole shanty. Anyway, he woke 3 or 4 others who were sleeping on beds and stretchers, and one on a shakedown on the floor, in the same room. It had been a wet night, and the shanty was full of shearers from Big Billabong Shed, which had cut out the day before. My roommates had been drinking and gambling overnight, and they swore luridly at the intruder for disturbing them. He was about 6'3" or thereabout. He was loosely built, bony, sandy complexioned, and grey-eyed. He wore a good-humoured grin at most times, as I noticed later on. He was of a type of bushman that I always liked, the sort that seem to get more good-natured the longer they grow, yet are hard-knuckled and would accommodate a man who wanted to fight or thrash a bully in a good-natured way. The sort that liked to carry somebody's baby around and cut wood, carry water, and do little things for overworked married bushwomen. He wore a saddle tweed sack suit 2 sizes too small for him, and his face, neck, great hands, and bony wrists were covered with sun blotches and freckles.
I hope I ain't disturbing you,
he shouted as he bent over my bunk.
But there's a cove.
You needn't shout, I interrupted. I'm not deaf.
Oh, I beg your pardon, he shouted. I didn't know I was yelling. I thought you was the deaf fella.
Oh, that's all right, I said. What's the trouble?
Wait till them other chaps is done swearing, and I'll tell you, he said.
He spoke with quiet, good-natured drawl, with something of the nasal twang, but tone and drawl distinctly Australian, altogether apart from that of the Americans.
"Oh, spit it out, for Christ's sake, Longin!"
yelled one-eyed Bogan, who had been the worst swearer in a rough shed, and he fell back on his bunk as if his previous remarks had exhausted him.
"It's that there sick jackaroo that was picking up at Big Billabong," said the Giraffe. "He had a knock off the first week, and he's been here ever since. They're sending him away to hospital in Sydney by the special train. They're just going to take him up in the wagonette to the railway station, and I thought I might as well go round with the hat and get him a few bob. He's got a missus and kids in Sydney."
"You're always going round with your gory hat," growled Bogan. "You'd blanky well take it round in hell."
"That's what he's doing, Bogan," muttered Gentleman Once on the shakedown, with his face to the wall. The hat was a genuine cabbage tree, one of the sort that last a lifetime. It was well coloured, almost black in fact with weather and age, and it had a new strap round the base of the crown. I looked into it and saw a dirty £1 note and some silver. I dropped in half a crown, which was more than I could spare, for I had only been a green hand at Big Billabong.
"Thank you," he said. "Now then, you fellas."
"I wish you'd keep your hat on your head and your money in your pockets and your sympathy somewhere else," growled Jack Moonlight, as he raised himself painfully on his elbow and felt under his pillow for 2 half-crowns. "Here," he said, "here's 2 half-cases. Chuck 'em in and let me sleep, for God's sake." Gentleman Once, the gambler, rolled round on his shakedown, bringing his good-looking, dissipated face from the wall. He had turned in his clothes, and, with considerable exertion, he shoved his hand down into the pocket of his trousers, which were a tight fit. He brought up a roll of £1 notes and could find no silver. "Here," he said to the Giraffe, "I might as well lay a quid.
I'll chance it anyway. Chuck it in."
"You've got rats this morning, gentleman once," growled the bogan. "It ain't a blanky horse race."
"Perhaps I have," said Gentleman Once, and he turned to the wall again with his head on his arm.
"Now, bogan, you might as well chuck in something," said the Giraffe.
"What's the matter with the jackaroo?"
asked the bogan, tugging his trousers from under the mattress. Moonlight said something in a low tone.
He has," said Bogan. "Well, I pity the... Here, I'll chuck in half a quid."
And he dropped half a sovereign into the hat. The fourth man, who was known to his face as Barcoo Rot, and behind his back as the Mean Man, had been drinking all night, and not even Bogan's stump-splitting adjectives could rouse him. So Bogan got out of bed, and calling on us, as blanky female cattle, to witness what he was about to do, he rolled the drunkard over, prospected his pockets till he made up 5 shillings, or a caser in bush language, and chucked them into the hat. And Barcoo Rot is probably unconscious to this day that he was ever connected with an act of charity. The Giraffe struck the deaf jackaroo in the next room. I heard the chaps cursing Lawson for waking them, and Deafin for being, as they thought at first, the indirect cause of the disturbance. I heard the Giraffe and his hat being condemned in other rooms, and cursed along the verandah where more shearers were sleeping, and after a while I turned out. The Giraffe was carefully fixing a mattress and pillows on the floor of a wagonette, and presently a man, who looked like a corpse, was carried out and lifted into the trap. As the wagonette started, the shanty keeper, a fat, soulless-looking man, put his hand in his pocket and dropped a quid into the hat which was still going round, in the hands of the Giraffe's mate, little Teddy Thompson, who was as far below medium height as the Giraffe was above it. The Giraffe took the horse's head and led him along on the most level parts of the road towards the railway station, and 2 or 3 chaps went along to help get the sick man into the train. The shearing season was over in that district, but I got a job of house painting, which was my trade, at the Great Western Hotel, a 2-storey brick place, and I stayed in Bourke for a couple of months. The Giraffe was a Victorian native from Bendigo. He was well known in Bourke, and to many shearers who came through the great dry scrubs from hundreds of miles around. He was stakeholder, drunkard's banker, peacemaker where possible, referee or second to oblige the chaps when a fight was on, big brother or uncle to most of the children in town, final court of appeal when the youngsters had a dispute over a foot race at the school picnic, referee at their fights, and he was the stranger's friend.
"The feller as knows can butt around for himself," he'd say, "but I always like to do what I can for a hard-up stranger cove. I was a green hand jackaroo once myself, and I know what it is."
"You're always bothering about other people, Giraffe," said Tom Hall, the shearers' union secretary, who was only a couple of inches shorter than the Giraffe. "There's nothing in it, you can take it from me. I ought to know."
"Well, what's a feller to do?" said the Giraffe. "I'm only hanging round here till shearing starts again, and a cove might as well be doing something. Besides, it ain't as if I was like a cove that had old people or a wife and kids to look after. I ain't got no responsibilities. A feller can't be doing nothing. Besides, I like to lend a helping hand when I can."
"Well, all I've got to say," said Tom, most of whose screw went in borrowed quids, etc., "all I've got to say is that you'll get no thanks, and you might blanky well starve in the end."
"There ain't no fear of me starving so long as I got me hands about me, and I ain't a cove as wants thanks," said the Giraffe.
He was always helping someone or something. Now it was a bit of a dance that we was getting up for the girls. Again it was Mrs. Smith, the woman whose husband was drowned in the flood in the Bogan River last Christmas, or that there poor woman down by the billabong. Her husband cleared out and left her with a lot of kids. or Bill something, the bullocky, who was run over by his own wagon while he was drunk, and got his leg broke. Towards the end of his spree, One-Eyed Bogan broke loose and smashed nearly all the windows of the Carrier's Arms, and next morning he was fined heavily at the police court. About dinner time I encountered the Giraffe and his hat, with 2 half-crowns in it for a start.
"I'm sorry to trouble you," he said, "but One-Eyed Bogan can't pay his fine, and I thought we might fix it up for him. He ain't half a bad sort of fellow when he ain't drinking. It's only when he gets too much booze in him."
After shearing, the hat usually started round with the Giraffe's own dirty crumpled pound note in the bottom of it as a send-off. Later on it was half a sovereign, and so on down to half a crown and a shilling as he got short of stuff, till in the end he would borrow a few bob, which he always repaid after the next shearing, just to start the thing going. There were several yarns about him and his hat. 'Twas said that the hat had belonged to his father, whom he resembled in every respect, and it had been going round for so many years that the crown was worn as thin as paper by the quids, half-quids, cases, half-cases, bobs and tanners or sprats, to say nothing of the scrums, that had been chucked into it in its time and shaken up. They say that, when a new governor visited Bourke, the Giraffe happened to be standing on the platform close to the exit, grinning good-humouredly, and the local toady nudged him urgently and said in an awful whisper, "Take off your hat! Why don't you take off your hat?"
"Why?" drawled the Giraffe. "He ain't hard up, is he?"
And they fondly cherish an anecdote to the effect that, when the one-man, one-vote bill was passed, or payment of members, or when the first Labor Party went in, I forget on which occasion they said it was, the Giraffe was carried away by the general enthusiasm, got a few beers into him, chucked a quid into his hat, and sent it round. The boys contributed by force of habit, and contributed largely because of the victory and the beer. And when the hat came back to the Giraffe, he stood holding it in front of him with both hands and stared blankly into it for a while. Then it dawned on him.
"Blowed if I haven't been and gone and took up a bloomin' collection for myself," he said.
He was almost a teetotaler, but he stood his shout in reason. He mostly drank ginger beer.
"I ain't a feller that boozes, but I ain't got nothin' agin chaps enjoyin' themselves, so long as they don't go too far."
It was common for a man on the spree to say to him,
Here's 5 quid. Look after it for me, Giraffe, will you, till I get off the booze."
His real name was Bob Brothers, and his bush names Longan, the Giraffe, Send round the hat, Chuck in a bob, and Ginger Ale. Some years before, camels and Afghan drivers had been imported to the Bourke district. The camels did very well in the dry country. They went right across country and carried everything from sardines to flooring boards. And the teamsters loved the Afghans nearly as much as Sydney furniture makers love the cheap Chinese in the same line. They love 'em even as union shearers on strike love blacklegs brought up country to take their places. Now, the Giraffe was a good straight unionist, but in cases of sickness or trouble he was as apt to forget his unionism as all bushmen are, at all times and for all time, to forget their creed. So one evening the Giraffe blundered into the Carrier's Arms, of all places in the world, when it was full of teamsters. He had his hat in his hand and some small silver and coppers in it.
"Well, say, you fellers, there's a poor sick Afghan in the camp down there along the—"
A big brawny bullock driver took him firmly by the shoulders, or rather by the elbows, and ran him out before any damage was done. The Giraffe took it as he took most things, good-humouredly, but about dusk he was seen slipping down to the Afghan's camp with a billy of soup.